Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm Virginia, one of the VALVecampus organizers. We are very happy to welcome Andrea Finazzi, Chief Commercial Officer of IRE-OMBA company. Today, talk about the sales in Europe versus USA. If you have any question, please write in the chat box. Now, I'm pleased to present Andrea Finazzi. Thank you so much and have a good webinar.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrea Finazzi. I'll shortly be presenting you why we're here today, so a set of slides. And so without further adding, let me go to the slides. Okay, so today's topic is the differences between selling in the United States versus Europe. First of all, so that is me. I was born in 1977. And I spent 5 years of my life, my working life, between 2012 and 2016 in Houston. I was president of sales for North America of an Italian group called Giva. So even though the name sounds big, president, in reality, we were an office made of 5 people total. And actually over there we were selling to everybody in the United States and Canada. But most importantly, I had the chance to sell directly, and so got to learn the American way. This presentation has 2 main targets, I think. The first target is peer salesmen, just like me. That would like to understand maybe a little bit more of their American counterparts, and maybe, why not, even their American customers, if they have one, because sometimes we take for granted something which may be different. So in this presentation, hopefully, there will be some differences highlighted that may be useful to you. The second target is probably the company managers that somewhere within the presentation may pick some suggestions to possibly change something within their organization, maybe to mirror some best practices that are happening in the United States, which may be or may not be, that will depend on your personal opinion, better than Italy. So today I'm working in IRE-OMBA as Chief Commercial Officer. Let me spend just a few words on who IRE-OMBA is. IRE-OMBA is a ring rolling company. The reason why we belong to VALVEcampus is because a lot of our production goes to the valve world. In particular, our rings are used for seats. So the seats that you can see in ball valves, for instance. We sell to OEMs in the sector, and we sell to seats manufacturers from 8-inch upward up to 6 tons. Well, normally they are much smaller than that anyway, and we cover all grades from carbon steel and upwards. Lately, we've been investing in hot profiling technology, and so hopefully we'll be starting doing closures and bodies as well. The last thing I want to say is Northern Italy is the hub, the world heart of ring rolling. If some of you that are listening right now belongs to some purchasing department, will know that. We have lots of competitors. One thing that IRE-OMBA is proud of is the quality. And our motto is everybody makes mistakes, ours never leave the factory, and I'm glad to say that that is true. Virginia is definitely doing a very good job in promoting VALVEcampus, so I will not spend many words talking about VALVEcampus. She does a great job at doing that. We are associate, as I said. It's a very good place. I will just say that it's a very good place to learn and to sometimes express our opinion. So I think it's a good place to be. Social networking. That's the first thing that for me was very important. It's a key word it's a key word for me that underlines the differences between United States and Europe. What is social networking? Social networking, I'm sure you've all heard this term many times. It means a lot of things. But for me, social networking is just mainly a special mindset. So something that is innate in the American people mindset, whereas for us European is not that common. And in general, it means that in our context, so in a business context, it means to be open to talk to a perfect stranger and to try to get as much information as possible in the shortest time possible, and get new leads and be on our way. So it means fast, means quick connection, and it's something that over a beer maybe, and it's something that European people need to work on, and American have it natural. But let's see some example of that. Examples of this, and it's important to underline that I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist, so everything I say is based on my personal experience. So I see this happening in gyms, I see it happening in bars, in events at trade shows. So I see Americans are very, 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 it comes very natural to them. Whereas, as I said, Europeans don't do that much. But one important thing about this is something that happened to me. I was in Florida. I was attending a power gen in Orlando. Maybe some of you have attended that in the past. One was in Las Vegas, one was in Orlando. And what happened is I was with a colleague of mine. She was a couple of years older than I was, and we had a good time. In the day, we worked a lot in our booth, etc. And in the night, there was a party, some sort of events at the hotel. And basically, what happened is that I was tired, so I went to bed, and she stayed out until 4 a.m. that morning. And eventually, she told me that she'd gathered just by staying out, just by talking to people, 3 or 4 very precious leads that then we developed and turned out to be very nice. So I learned a lesson that night, and I want to share it with you. The lesson is selling must be fun. If you don't have fun trying to sell, then you're not a salesman. So I think that the first thing that an employer in Italy, when it tries to hire some salesmen, obviously I'm talking about outside salespeople, so people that are often on a sales mission. I'm not talking in this particular context about inside sales or clerical workers. So talking about an outside sale. First thing he would say is, when you're out on a mission, bed is prohibited. Bed is prohibited. You don't go to bed. You don't sleep. You stay up, and maybe over a beer or two, you try to talk to as many people as possible. Obviously, I'm not necessarily with the, let's say, with the intention of having fun, but always a mixture between learning things and having fun at the same time. I think this concept is very, very important. In fact, I want to tell you another anecdote that happened to me when I went back to Europe, working for the company I currently work for, OMBA. So in Europe, we were in Munich, and we just attended a huge show. And basically what happened, the same thing happened as it happened to me a couple of years earlier. So after the show, we had our booth, we went to a bar. And my 2 colleagues, salesmen, so skilled salesmen that have been doing sales for all their lives. After dinner, they told me they wanted to go to bed. And I told them, why do you want to go to bed? There's possibilities. If we hit a bar, after such a big show, there will surely be people there'll surely be people in bars and we can talk to, and maybe who knows what kind of leads we can get out of them. But they said, no, we're tired, we're going to bed. And so they just missed the chance. So this is real life. And the thing is, what made me think is, and that's the last thing that I put in my slide, had they been younger, maybe instead of being in their 40s, had they been in their 20s, I think, I have a suspect that they would have stayed out. However, they wouldn't have stayed out for business, but they would have stayed out for fun. So again, somehow missing out on the opportunity. So the perfect balance between business and fun, I only saw it in America. So this for me was a big lesson. Before switching on to the next slide, I want just to summarize this first part of our conversation with this. I think Europeans salesmen are either switched on or switched off. So during the working hours, they're definitely switched on, but during the non-working hours, they tend to be switched off. So even if an important opportunity passes them by, they rarely grab it. Whereas Americans, in my opinion, are always switched on. And maybe they're less productive during daytime, maybe during the working hours. Maybe Europeans work a little harder, maybe. But the good thing about them is that they're always switched on. And that takes them a long way in sales. Because of social networking, which I discussed earlier on. Customer entertainment, this is a big chapter. So we've talked about social networking, and that applies mainly to new opportunities, to leads, all right? Customer entertainment applies to current customers, or prospects, so people that we know, definitely know that can represent some sort of definite business for us. So in this case, there's a new chapter, customer entertainment. Of course, to maintain a customer, you don't, being a good salesman is not enough. You need a whole company behind you to perform. So you need a whole company to deliver on time, to have good quality, to have good customer service. Of course, you need all these things. But let's take these things for granted 1 second. So the difference is made by customer entertainment. So customer entertainment means allocating money and time to take care of a customer. So it means taking him or her out to lunch, eating whatever this person likes, buying some tickets to a football match, or if he likes hunting, go with him or her hunting. Or very, very important in the United States, and that's the picture that you can see, is playing golf. So a lot of times, a lot of successful deals happen on a golf court. And so what am I trying to say with this? I'm trying to say that it comes natural from their social networking mentality. So it kind of develops into the customer entertainment mentality. It's just a variation of it. However, I can guarantee you that 90% of my meetings in the United States didn't happen in a meeting room. Meeting rooms happen only when there's something substantial going on, involving some major contracts to be signed, and involving maybe some other layers in the company, whether it be technical department, quality department, or whatever else. However, most of the deals, most of the rumors that you get from the market happen during lunches or games or whatever. So again, this is something that happened in America a lot. It doesn't happen at all, or if it does, much less than the United States. But let's try to understand why. Before that, obviously, I spent a few words on what happens in Europe on the other hand. Well, I don't know where the audience today is from mainly. However, I'm sure a lot of you are Europeans, so you know that in Europe, most of the meetings are in meeting rooms. And what's more is that if there is a lunch afterwards or a dinner, very, very often it's not with two people only, so one salesman and the buyer, it's with more people. So 1 + 1 is the best setup to maximize your chances of getting to know someone personally, getting to know his or her tastes, getting to know his problems, his whatever makes him or her worried. However, if you are more than two, this is more difficult to achieve. It's definitely more difficult. So I think that from a salesman point of view, this was another lesson for me to take home. But what are the reasons of those differences? So I've been thinking this thing over in my head. And again, I'm not a scholar. I haven't read books about this. So maybe these things are already debated, have already been studied by people. I don't know. I really don't know. However, I'm just here to give you my personal opinion, right? So I hope you agree. If not, at the end of this presentation, we'll have some Q&A, and it's not you asking me things and me answering. It's more like a debate. So let's see it that way. Okay. So I think these two reasons come mainly from the way sales offices are set up. So the organizational charts between United States and Europe. And second, and maybe most important, is the compensation schemes, meaning the paychecks that people get, whether it's on a fixed basis or on a variable basis. But let's see these two things in detail. So the first thing is the sales department structure, we said. All right, first of all, in the United States, there is a very, very strict separation of roles. So in a sales department, we have three main figures. Figure number one is clerical. It's typical of someone who handles paperwork. So makes possible the flow of information from the sales department to the rest of the company and from outside to the sales department. So it's like paperwork handling role. Then we have an inside sales. Inside sales are people who don't like to travel, who don't like necessarily to go out on lunches and talk to people and being always dressed smart and smiling all the time. So people who kind of likes it because they're on the phone, they write emails, but not too much. So let me put it this way. And they like to develop quotes. So they develop quotes. That means that they talk to technical department, quality department, costing department, whatever else. So they do the dirty work. And outside sales is the pure salesman. So similar to what you see in B2C. Sorry, in B2C. So similar to a shoe seller or a waiter in a restaurant. So the outside sales in the United States are people who know how to sell. So they could sell cars. So in B2B, you get people who are much, much more skilled at selling than what you get in Europe. Maybe they're not good at doing other things. In Europe, there is a lot bigger variety of roles. They're more mixed up. So maybe you get somebody who's in sales that at the same time talks to finance, talks to quality, talks to whoever else, and then has, at the end of the day, has little time to do his job. Whereas in the United States, there's a much bigger specialization of roles. And that is, for me, one of the reasons why, one of the big differences between United States and Italy. But in particular, there are two things that makes it different: the territorial specialization and the use of time. What is territorial specialization? All right. Well, before going into this, let me say something. I believe most of you come from the Valve world. So Valve world may be different from the world I come from, which is mainly raw material. So which is mainly transformation. So what I'm about to say applies to my world a lot. Maybe won't to yours, but try always to remember that I'm talking from my experience. So if something of what I'm about to say doesn't apply to you, then don't worry, we're still friends. All right. So, but anyway, what I'm trying to say is just think of an example. I remember when I used to live in Houston. What is considered the Texas Gulf Coast is something that goes from Lake Charles, Louisiana, down to more or less Victoria, Corpus Christi in Texas. So it's a long stretch of coast, and it's a lot of business in there. Obviously, Houston is part of it. Obviously, anyway, just to cut it short, when I was there, I had the opportunity to learn that the structure, the sales structure of some of our competitors, local competitors, so Texan competitors. And they were doing rings and forgings just like us. And I learned that one of them had 9 local salesmen just to cover the Texas Gulf Coast. So can you imagine 9 sales agents just to cover one coast? I mean, as big as it can be, it's 7 hours drive, right? So it's so what does that tell you? It tells you that the smaller the territory you're allocated to develop, the more detail you get out of it. So the smaller the company you talk to, you take every drop of water out of the dry desert, right? Vice versa, the larger a territory, the bigger the companies you will talk to. So forgetting to talk with smaller companies. So this basing my discussion on the fact that production is local. So if production is not local, it's a different story, but I'm saying Europe to Europe, United States to United States. So United States to United States, they have very, let's say, detailed control of the territory. In Europe, I don't see that. So for instance, my company right now, it's Europe to Europe, mainly 99% is Europe to Europe. But we give our agents or salesmen, we give them a huge area, the whole of Germany, and then the whole of France, and then, I don't know, the whole of Spain. So you can understand that when transportation is not a huge deal, like Europe to Europe or United States to United States, this kind of approach maybe doesn't pay off too much. So I think that people in Europe should think a little bit more about a trade-off, a balance between cost of sales structures versus results. So we don't value here in Europe very much this concept, whereas in the United States, they do. So obviously they spend a whole lot more money on sales structures than we do, but maybe the payoff is better. So I'm not saying it's better, but just some food for thoughts for you. If you want to think this over, maybe is something that is worth thinking about. And anyway, for me, this is a big difference. The other big difference is the use of time. This comes, let's say, it's hand in hand with the concept I said before. So essentially, it's as I said, since there's a lot of specialization in the United States, people, the salesmen over there can do the best use they can of their softwares, which can be CRM, which can be business intelligence, or it can be anything else, anything they want, some personal made charts. Okay, so whereas in Europe, as I said, as people are slowed down more by other things, such as meetings, a lot more meetings, whereas having to help other departments doing their things, and so they end up having little quality time. So to cut it short, I think United States salesmen, outside sales. When I say salesmen, I always intend either outside salesmen or agents, right? So they have a lot more time to do quality work than their European counterparts. So this is something, again, that's worth thinking about for me. Last note on CRMs. CRMs have been used in the United States for over 20 years. I remember when I went there in 2012. Before that, I was sales manager in a big company. I've never heard about CRM. I mean, I heard about it, but never used it. So in Italy, in 2010, 2011, these things were not that popular yet. When I went to the United States, even though we were small, remember at the beginning we were just 3 people, CRMs were very used. And the people I hired, first thing they told me is, why don't we use a CRM? So just this tells the difference in mentality. So a population that is that's looking at data as the driver to do business, and the nation that's looking at more at doing things, at talking within organization less than watching data often, okay? And then compensation schemes. Compensation schemes, sorry, it's a very big topic for me. So in the United States, a big chunk of any salesman paycheck comes from variable part. So it varies between big companies or small companies. However, what's important to say is that a salesman is never paid a fixed salary. It's impossible. Okay. What this does, it gives the salesman a lot of drive to get his job done and to try to sell as much as possible. Now, this is somehow linked to customer entertainment again, which we'll talk about in a minute in relation to this. However, companies are sure that their salesmen will do whatever it takes to get that job done. Obviously, there will have to be some ceilings put, right? So companies will have to say you can't compromise on margins, you can't compromise on payment terms, you can't compromise on whatever else. However, given this limitation, is still there's a lot more drive to get things done than Europe. In Europe, I think it's more difficult to do this, maybe because of mentality, maybe because I think mentality is unions even. But the difference, this brings me to say something that I think is important. American companies always their radar is set on increasing the value of the company. So at any point, the company can be sold at any point. So we have to increase the value of the company. That's their mantra. That's their only target. In Europe, companies have more social importance as well. And so people working for a company somehow feel grateful for working in that company. And so they're more attached. So they feel part of it. In America, people are more detached. So companies want to make money, people want to make money. That's it. So you can talk about mere percentages and it's more acceptable. In Europe, I think it's a little bit more difficult. But again, my personal feeling is that if it was at all possible, I would be very happy to bring this compensation scheme in Europe as well, in our company, because I think the results will be better. Okay, the customer entertainment budgets obviously has something to do with it. Why? Because customer entertainment is not paid by the salesman. Obviously, they have a budget, right? So having a budget, obviously, if they didn't have one, the salesman would spend a lot of money to to try to be friends with their counterparts. So companies have to decide how much money to give each salesman to do his job. And so it's a trade-off between saving some money and spending for the single salesman to get the job done, and for the company to try not to give too much money, but at the same time not to slow down the work of the salesman. Sometimes this customer entertainment concept is borderline with corruption, with bribery. Some people may look at it this way. However, as you know, lately, a lot of American companies, knowing that this activity may jeopardize their cost-saving initiatives because buyers would be more inclined to place business with people who give them presents rather than most cost-effective people, they try to curb this by imposing very severe rules not to accept certain presents or whatever. However, we all know that there's a lot of ways to go around these rules. During working hours, it's impossible, but outside of working hours, Saturdays, Sundays, evenings, when it comes to personal time, then anybody can do whatever they want with their time. And so we all know that there are ways to work around these rules. But again, this is something that in Europe it's still very primitive. Since there isn't this culture, I think it's even easier for European salesmen to take care of their customers. And one of the things that makes me say it's easier is because in a lot of places they're not even given a budget for customer entertaining purposes. So unlike United States, where each ticket is looked at and analyzed, in Europe, I think there still is some sort of allowance, bigger allowance, and so salesmen could use it better than what they do a lot of time. Selling as a science. This is important, I think. Okay, you can see it anywhere. You go to a restaurant and then you see waiters always greeting you in the same way, with using the same words. You go to a trade show and you see people from the same companies dressing in the same way, with the same company shirt. And then when you talk to them, you see they smile in the same way, more or less they tell you the same things. If they don't know what to say, they will reply in the same way, etc. So I'm sure that if for any reason a buyer of a company was to see two salesmen from the same company in the United States, even though they wouldn't tell him, he would be able to tell right away that they come from the same company because of the way they dress, the way they talk. In Europe, this would never happen. Two salesmen from the same company, they would dress in different ways, they would talk in different ways, they would present things in different ways, and they would answer questions in different ways. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, I leave it to you. But I believe that if you're sure that your rules work, then I think you should somehow impose them on people with a smile on your face, making them understand why these rules work, unlike others. But at the end of the day, I think that we don't see selling as a science in Europe. Maybe we do it in car dealers. Maybe we do it in other B2C environments, but definitely not in B2B. And I think this should be seen as a chance for us to improve our ways, and make it a little bit more corporate ways rather than personal, individual way of doing things. Last thing I want to say about this slide is that this is reflected also in customer service. So Americans are very, very much used to be taken care of in a very kind way. So personally, if you go to a restaurant, if you go anywhere where you're the customer, they will treat you with a smile. They will try to make your life as easy as possible. If you don't understand something, they'll try to break it down to you in ways that it will be easier for you to understand. In Europe, we're not used to be treated with kindness. Maybe we've had too many wars on our soil. We've had too much hardship in the past. I don't know. However, we're used to to not have lives that are particularly easy, right? So people talk to us in rough ways and whatever. So when it comes to selling things, this makes a big difference. So selling things with a big smile, making things easy for your counterparts, and respecting deadlines. These are all things that come natural to an American. Whereas in Europe, we treat people the way we are treated, and so we tend to be a little bit rougher. So think of what competitive advantage we would have over our own European competitors if we applied the American way in Europe. Immediately, we would be perceived as a better company to go to, just because we treat them better. So again, this is just food for thoughts. Anybody can decide what is best to take home, but I think this is something that for me made a difference. And okay, why is the American way not replicable in Europe? Again, it's a little bit of what I've already said, but I think the second sentence that I put in this slide is important. Another thing that makes us different from Americans is that Americans like to be told what to do. They like to be given defined boundaries, right? That must not be crossed. Europeans, on the other hand, they don't like this too much. They resent this approach. They like to do things on their own, in their own way. So obviously, this makes it harder for European managers to tell their army, their sales army, to do what they want them to do. It makes it harder. With Americans, it's easier. However, in my opinion, Europeans, because of the way they've been working, they had to develop more creativity. They had to use during time more personal wit, and so they're very, very good assets. So European salesmen for me are raw diamonds. So were they given the same rules that American salesmen have, they would be extremely good salesmen. So it's just a pity that this, let's say, selling science that they have in the United States is not replied in Europe. In my opinion, it's a big pity. Because, as I said, we have this personal talent which is very high. So at the end of the day, our B2B is B2B. In the United States, B2B is almost something like a B2C in Europe, so something to work on. This is all. This is all for the actual presentation. Well, thank you very much for joining. I think we can leave this last part to question and answers. So without adding anything further, I'll leave the word to Virginia.
Okay. Carlotta, you are connected.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Carlotta and I work with Andrea. I am an inside sale in IRE-OMBA. So we have some questions. First is, I have experience working in the States and attended many social networking events. As a female staying up for networking drinking, it went wrong many times. I thought that networking based on work, but many people have different intentions. How can we make sure that drinking, networking talk will be stay as professional and make sure that talk will end up as actual deal? Do you have any tips?
Well, obviously, this can always happen. I think that it happened to the other colleague I talked about, the female colleague I had, which I based my anecdote on. She had this experience. So even though she definitely brought home some very, very good leads, still that night she told me that some man did try to go a little further than she wanted. Well, you know, this is I think natural. Just remember that American men and women cannot absolutely they have a slightly different mentality than we do because, as you know, sexual harassment is a big thing in the United States. Obviously, that's confined within the walls of a company. When you're outside of it, so when you are at a special event, for instance, in a trade show, then you're allowed to do more or less what you want. However, being sued, so having to face a judge in the United States for sexual harassment is big thing. It's a very big thing. Women always win, the weaker always win, so they are cautious. So I think that Americans are a lot more straightforward than Europeans. So more or less, yes, I can imagine them trying to get a little bit further than they're supposed to. However, they're very cautious. So a woman should know that if she says no, most likely an American man would stop there because he's afraid that a sue may come after it. So this is my advice. So try to get as much as you can out of business talks. It may happen that some male tries to go a little further, but the environment is pro women. So I don't know if I answered you, but I would still do it. If I were you, I would still do it, being cautious myself, but you're more protected there than in Europe, let's say.
Okay. One more question is, for the commission system, how do you deal with the complaint from other departments? In Europe, many companies try to work as a team. You make a sale as a team because without inside sales or admin or financial people, there will be no sales. How are you going to motivate engineers to work hard while they see sales are driving nice fancy cars based on commissions?
Well, first of all, if you drive a nice fancy car based on commission, it means that you've done a good job. And a lot of people don't want to risk it. So a lot of engineers or people in admin, whatever, they're happier to have maybe a lower pay, but sure. But that is not questioned. So let's say they get 100, but that's 100, right? Every time. Whereas salesmen, yeah, they may get 150, but they may also get 50. So when you put that on the table, a lot of people are not happy to have that. So outside salesmen are people that are more inclined to taking risks in general. So are people who are very straightforward, very I hear something in the background, but anyway, are people that in general are very outgoing and accept this sort of risks. Whereas people in admin and technical department, again, I'm not a sociologist, but I think they like fixed salary and no risk. But that's just me. So if I was a manager trying to impose this on a company, I would do this sort of speech. There are, I don't know if it worked in Italy, but that's the way it is in the United States. So again, I don't have answers today for you. I'm just bringing facts to the table, and then hopefully, each one of you can then come up with his own opinion. It's just, food for thoughts, as I said, room for debate.
Okay, there are one or two more questions. Which approach do you prefer between the Europe and the American one?
Well, I think the American way of selling is more tidy, is more structured. As I said, there's less room for improvising, let's say, whereas in Europe it's very much down to the personal individual being talented. So Americans say we cannot be sure that our salesmen are talented, so we have to invest in structures, in rules. So what do I like better? I think that the best thing would be to have a skilled person with rules. So, but this can only happen in the United States. In Europe, you can only have a skilled person if you're lucky, that's good. But if he had more rules, he would definitely be even more performing. So in my opinion, the American way is still better when it comes to selling.
Okay, we have one more question that is, what was the best teaching from this experience? Well, your experience in the States.
Well, the best teaching for me was, again, this social networking attitude. So just by watching them, maybe more often in weekends rather than working days, because working days, you kind of expect people to behave professionally. So striking a conversation with a stranger when you know that this person still belongs to your environment, still belongs to your world. And so you kind of give it for granted. But if you see that on a Sunday, maybe in front of a grill, and you see someone passing by that's wearing a company shirt that, oh my God, you stop him and they start talking, they offer him a beer. This doesn't happen in Europe. So this always surprised me and made a big impression on me. So definitely that is the biggest teaching that I brought home. So to always be switched on to opportunities and, never let my guard down. So that is what I thought it's been the most important thing.
Okay. Do you have any more question? You can write it down in the chat if you have.
Carlotta, I have another point, a question to Andrea.
Yes.
He mentioned, of course, there is a basic difference between US and Europe, particularly Italy, in terms of payment and salaries and so on. I think that this in Europe, and more particularly in Italy, the form of variable basis for a good salesman is, as was mentioned before in a comment, is also due to the fact that people from the other departments are becoming competitors, and they feel that salesmen, even the not the best ones, are always treated a little better. But on top of that, I'm wondering how does it compare? How do you, Andrea, compare the variable basis format between US, Europe, and Italy in terms of comparison with the trade unions?
Mm-hmm.
In US, I don't think there is such a power.
No, it's okay. First of all, in the US, well, let me do a little bit of introduction here. I'm not an expert in this field, so I can tell you for a fact that some friends of mine, Italian friends of mine, but even American friends of mine, when I used to live there, even though they didn't belong to sales, just to illustrate the difference in mentality, they belong to other director level roles, whether it be production or technical or other, and still a big chunk of their salary was variable. However, the difference is that most of the variable part is something that is really well defined when you sign a contract. When each year you know exactly what you're up against. So whether it be, let's say, 100% of your variable part, which may represent up to, I don't know, 30, 40% of your total yearly check, you know that it's made up of, I don't know, 30% of your group performance, 35% from your personal work, and another 35% from the whole company's results, which whose parameters may be different from company to company. And so they know exactly what to do. So it's not true that somehow the rest of the company doesn't participate in this variable. Well, maybe, and that's what I don't know. Maybe this is open only to directors or high level and not to anybody else. This I don't know. But a sort of company-related compensation is definitely there, even in the United States. I think the main difference is still lies in the clearliness of these parameters. So in Europe, in my experience, bonuses, the variable part is always a little bit blurry and can always be discussed even afterwards. Whereas in the United States, it's written in stone. And if the performance is poor, there will never be anybody in the United States complaining about how small a paycheck he gets. If the numbers are not there, he doesn't get the paycheck. I mean, it's easy. Whereas in Europe, there will be an uproar, people would complain about a bad paycheck. In America, it doesn't happen. You know it up front what you're up against. So it's different. So I know I've not answered your question, Maurizio, but that's the best I can offer you right now.
It was a good answer anyway, and I fully share your opinion.
Okay, there are another question. Thank you again, Andrea, Carlotta, and the IRE-OMBA company for sharing your knowledge with us. The webinar is recorded and will be published on VALVecampus YouTube channel. Please subscribe to it and follow VALVecampus on LinkedIn page. The next webinar will be on the start of July, and the topic will be the general introduction on valves by Flowserve company. And now, a final word from the VALVEcampus president, Maurizio Brancaleoni. Maurizio?
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you again to IRE-OMBA and to Andrea and Carlotta for their support and very, very good presentation and cooperation.
Thank you.
I can only say that, yes, VALVEcampus is an association made by companies deeply involved in the valve supply chain, and we cover all the aspects. And we try now more and more to be involving also the end users and engineering and constructor companies, EPCs. And shortly you will have some more news. So please stay tuned, and I'm sure Virginia will be able very, very quickly to update with interesting information. Another webinar which will take place after the one Virginia just mentioned will be on the 28th of July, and this will be on another topic very, very important for the valve industry at large, which is the manufacturing, additive manufacturing 3D printers. And we have some very good champions that will present their experience, and they'll present some case studies. So please write it down on your agenda, 28th of July, webinar on the additive manufacturing, particularly dedicated to the oil and gas valve applications. And surely again, you will find all the information shortly on the VALVEcampus website. So having said that, I would like to have the smile of Virginia to close the session. And I apologize if I could not participate at the very beginning. But again, many, many thanks, Andrea, for your excellent presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Carlotta. And I wish you all a very nice day. Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.